say, first of all, thanks to the Department of Economic Geology. I think about 2 or 3 years back I was here, and my experience that day was that perhaps I went too much into the science, and people or students felt that my kind of person is not required for 31st evening to now speak on those hard science. So that memory perhaps influenced me this time to change my topic. In the beginning, I was thinking of speaking on a new concept called Golden Road, which is an historical concept. But then I felt if I speak too much on history, people might then comment that last year you spoke too much on science, this time you are speaking too much on history. So I thought I'll combine the two together. And what I brought today is too simple an argument, too simple a presentation. And now I'm feeling very embarrassed looking at some luminaries in the dais here. I never thought physiology 31st evening or afternoon talk is going to be so famous. Next time if I am called, next time I'll come certainly well prepared for a very meaningful talk. So let me start. I thought I will discuss with you on why some cities are abandoned. And the lesson that I want to now derive to answer this question is from simple cell biology. Let me now go ahead presenting what I mean by abandoned cities. All of you know this Chernobyl city in Russia, correct? Can you hear me? Okay. All of you know this Chernobyl. This city was abandoned purely because of the nuclear disaster. All of you know about it. So the reason why it's abandoned is nuclear disaster. And can anyone tell me what is this city? This city? Let me see if our youngsters are really aware of our Indian geographies. I'm giving you a clue. Yeah? Yeah? Very good. You may be clear. That is Dhanushkodi. That was submerged almost in the cyclone in 1964. And this city was completely abandoned in the southernmost part of the Indian country. And if any of you want to enjoy the best of the abandoned cities, you go to Dhanushkodi. It's very near to us. People come from all the way from America, Russia, and our own youngsters have not gone there. I have been there. It's a wonderful place. You can still see the railway station, churches, post office, and all that. They were abandoned. I very well remember in 1964, my father came from Kolar and he told it seems overnight because of cyclone, an entire city was, was taken away by the rains and it was submerged. That I knew, but only when I went there about 20 years back with my family, I realized what an event it is. Unfortunately, not many Indians know about it. I suggest all of you should go here. So this was abandoned because of cyclone, or actually cyclone ate up this whole city. So the first city is Pripyat, Ukraine. Second is Dhanushkodi, and there are a number of such cities, hundreds of cities that have actually disappeared or abandoned. For example, let us say this Kalmanskop in Namibia. This was swallowed by the desert islands. It was a diamond merchant city, diamond preparing and diamond marketing city. For 250 years, it was a well-established city. But suddenly it disappears because they say sand dunes began to move, just like our Palakadu. Sand dunes began to come there. The question is, how could sand dunes suddenly come around there? So something else has happened. Take at the second one. This is Bodie, USA, a gold rush era mining town where everything was left as if people just left. You can also go to the Google and then get into the city's images. You will see that entire city is still there. You can go and live, but no one lives there. Now, why is this kind of abandonment? So there are a number of such things, and why do people live just like that if everything is available? So these are the questions that would now rise against the examples that I told of either Dhanushkodi or Chernobyl. Take Hampi. Hampi is a vibrant city today, but do not forget, for almost 300 years, it was abandoned. Now, the reason people say it was abandoned, because in Talikota war, Bahmani Sultans and Vijayanagara kings fought. Vijayanagara kings lost the war, and so the city was abandoned. And they also say Bahmani Sultans came and even looted the city and burned the city and all that. But when a war is held and when a king loses, only king dies or king loses, common people will not die and they will not flee. They will be there always. They will flee the city or they will abandon the city only when they cannot live in the city for long. A farmer will not go anywhere just because the king lost. Or a goldsmith will not leave the city because the king was lost. They will continue to live, but Hampi was abandoned. Why? Perhaps you will see why it is so. And generally, these wars are given as reason for the abandonment of the city. Here is another example and exception. Jackson, Mississippi. If any of you want, you can go to the Scientific American paper in 2024, very recent. It says by 2100, thousands of cities in the United States might become abandoned. Now, one among them is Jackson, Mississippi. This whole city is abandoned. No people there. No one to occupy the places there. No war, no Chernobyl, no cyclone, and nothing of that kind. But nevertheless, the city is abandoned. Why? Now, it is these kind of cities that I think we need to now worry about. In other words, it appears that if one asks the question of why cities are abandoned, one question that we generally mean, one answer we get is like Chernobyl, natural or man-made disasters. Natural like Dhanushkodi or man-made like Chernobyl. But that is not always true for all the cities. Or people say wars, led to the destruction of the cities and abandonment of the cities. As I told, only kings lose and they die or they flee, but common man does not flee. So locals may not flee, they continue to live. And if that all the city is abandoned, that means the locals also have left. That means there is some other reason for that. So we cannot explain, in other words, abandonment of all the cities by such specific events of war, by such specific events of war or of disasters. So we need to now perhaps develop a generic explanation as to why cities get abandoned. A specific mechanistic explanation. When I say mechanistic generic, disturb. A generic or physical explanation, when I say mechanical or very simple explanation that we can actually offer to explain the abandonment of cities. And for that, what I will do is go to the cell biology and borrow some ideas from there and see if we can actually explain the abandonment. Any questions by now? No. One question could be, why are you talking about this? Blame this fellow. He got me to speak on something, so I brought this here. Let us go to the cell biology and take a simple data on the cells. We know cells are small. You all agree with that? Now, prokaryotes are small like this, single cells. They are from almost 0.5 to 5 micrometers. Whereas if you take eukaryotes, they are slightly larger in size and their size may range from 50 to 300 micrometers. That perhaps is the larger size or larger side of the size of the cells. Now, if we happen to take all of them put together available on this planet Earth, all the cells, and find their size and make a distribution, you will see that it follows a positively skewed distribution, meaning most of the organisms are having small cells and very rarely there are large cells. Now, what do we mean by small? I always have a problem of recognizing what is the meaning of micrometer. So I went back to the Google and I found that if I take a pen and put a dot on the paper, and that if I consider as the period or the dot, 1/500th of it is the size of a microbe. That is, divide that dot into 500 equal dots and the size of each of them will be the size of the microbe. That is around, let us say, 0.5 millimeters, sorry, 1/500th of the 0.5 millimeters, that is around 30 micrometers or so. So we all know what the size of these general cells is. However, though most of the cells are very small, there are exceptions. For example, this Ventricaria ventricos has a cell of this size. And all of you know, ostrich lays eggs as big as this, or dinosaurs lay eggs as big as this. They are all single cells, they are all very big. But they are not the cells that are actually living like a regular cell that can reproduce, grow and multiply and divide and all that. So we will now perhaps keep those aside. The normal organisms that are growing and reproducing like bacteria or algae all have small size cells, and most of the cells are very, very, very tiny. As you can see, 1 of the 500th size of the dot is the size of most of the cells. As I told, if I now take the size of the cell on the x-axis and distribute how many organisms are there in different categories, you generally find a positively skewed distribution, suggesting that most of the cells are in the range of 50 to 75 or 100 micrometers in their size. There are exceptions, that is on the right side, but very rare. Now, have you ever questioned why cells have not gone beyond this size? In other words, we see that proportion of small size cells is very high and very large cells are very rare. And then there is another feature of the cells that we should also remember here. Let us say a particular species of Chlamydomonas has evolved with a particular size. Around that size, it doesn't vary too much. It will be completely uniform around it. In other words, intra-specific variability in the cell size. Within the species, variability is very, very, very little. In other words, if I take one species, the variability will be highly restricted so much. So also variability is less. Most of the cells will be only within that small range, etc. There will be less variability within each group. You all agree with me? Yeah. So interspecific variability, if you now take, it is positively skewed. Most of the cells are very small. Within each species, cells are very, very uniform. They don't change their size very much at all, right? These are the two features. Now, how can we explain these two features? If we can explain the solution for, give an answer for these two features, perhaps we'll have a solution for why cities are also getting abandoned. Let us see how it is. Let us take the first question, why cells are very small. Now, if I tell you why cells are very small, you will all laugh. Oh, it is so simple, but let me now go through. Now, why are cells very small and why are they so uniform within species? These are the two questions, and from that, I want to extend that to other situations such as cities. I will not go into pollen grains and seeds. One can also now extend this, but this is not the place where I will be talking about. So, these are the elements of the talk today. Now, why are cells so small? Let us take a cell of this size and let us allow it to grow to the larger sizes, bigger and bigger. Now note that whenever a cell has to survive, it has to now derive oxygen for its survival. Oxygen has to come from the surrounding environment. And how does the oxygen go in? Through the perimeter, to the cell membrane. And the cell membrane is porous, oxygen enters through that. So also resources, it could be water or nutrients or whatever the resources, they all have to go into the cell through the cell membrane or the perimeter of the cell. Now what happens when the cell grows? The volume of the cell goes on increasing. Correct? What happens to the perimeter? Also increases, isn't it? Also increases. Now once consider a very big cell, volume has tremendously increased, perimeter also has increased, but the question is, whether the perimeter or the surface has increased at the same rate as the volume has increased. Now please note that oxygen and other resources enter via the surface into the whole cell, and those resources such as oxygen is required based on the volume of the cell. So the demand is proportional to the volume of the cell. How about the supply? Supply is proportional to the surface area or the cell membrane size of the cell. Are you all with me? So the supply of resources is proportional to the cell surface area, whereas the demand is proportional to the volume of the cell. Now keep this in mind and let us see what happens. When we observe the cell size, area and volume parameters, the following happens. Consider a cell or a circle whose radius is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Radius is increasing. What happens to the area? We all know pi r square. So the area goes on increasing from 3.14 to 78.57. Look at the number of times increase in the area or the volume. I'm only talking about the area. Volume will be much more because it's cube. Okay. So in other words, there is 26 times increase in the volume when the radius increases from 1 to 5. Are you all with me? So the volume is increased 26 times. How about the perimeter? Look at this. Perimeter is given by the equation 2 pi r, and if you now calculate, perimeter increases from 6.2 to 31.3, the increase is only 5 times. So while the membrane of the cell grows only 5 times, the volume grows 26 times when we increase the radius from 1 to 5. Yeah, I already told that the amount of resources required for the cell depends upon the volume of the cell, whereas the flow or supply depends on the surface. Now, as the volume is increasing, the demand is increasing 26 times, but the supply is increasing only 5 times. Can the cell survive? Decidedly. In other words, area increases in this proportion with increase in the radius, whereas perimeter is a linear line because 2 pi r is a linear equation. And if you now divide area by perimeter, perimeter to area, as you can see, goes on reducing. The perimeter to the area goes on reducing. That is, the surface area with respect to the volume relatively goes on reducing. In other words, the amount of supply available for every unit of the volume inside the cell goes on reducing. So if cell size goes on increasing, the supply goes on decreasing, cell cannot survive. And that is the simple reason why cells cannot be too big. Are you all with me? Okay. In other words, oxygen supply to every unit of mass in the
Perimeter is just a
surface. Yeah.
But the surface area of a sphere. If you look at the cell,
The proportion will be approximately in the same way because it's a cube. You know, volume also, I only take an area here and the perimeter of a circle. If you take a volume, the volume increases by cube root, surface area increases only by square. So the proportional difference goes on increasing. Okay. For the understanding, you have taken only the surface. Okay. In other words, the resource supply, especially oxygen, nutrients, water, and such things, for every unit of mass in the cell goes on decreasing with increase in the size of the cell. As a result, with increase in the size, oxygen supply decreases, nutrient supply decreases, very large cells cannot survive, and thus cells cannot be very large, and that's why we have very small cells. That's why the distribution is very small, and we don't have a cell as big as me or you. If it was possible, maybe you could have all survived with only one cell and not study physiology at all. So in other words, these are not possible, only these are possible.
Sir.
Yeah.
Is it the same reason why most species have the smaller size seeds?
I come to seed and pollen grains. As I told you, there is a similar argument we can extend to, but we will not discuss it. Okay? We can perhaps have discussion later. However, there are large cells. For example, if you take the cells like sperm cell, red blood cell, etc., their size is very, very high. Though they are also positively skewed, they are very big. How are they surviving? If you carefully look at them, it appears they are surviving by a different strategy. What is the strategy? Take the neural cells. They have extended the branches. So what happens to the perimeter? Increases. As the perimeter increases, they can draw resources and oxygen from all the surface, and the volume inside is very, very less. They can survive. So also red blood cells. Red blood cells are not spherical. They are exactly a circle. Okay. Here what happens, you see, not only circle, there is a depression there, because of which what happens to surface area? Increases. In fact, whenever the red blood cells are described or explained, they say it follows a donut shape. But I like to now change that word donut to vada shape. Because our textbooks told donut. I have not seen donut at all. I was written donut shape. I didn't know what donut is. Imagine if our teacher had told us vada shape. How easily would have imagined, isn't it? Okay? Only when I went to America in 1993, I came to know what donut is. So I think we need to know perhaps change this. So red blood cells are vada shape, and in other words, our ladies knew about the relation between volume and the perimeter much before I tell you. Why? Look at this vada. They put a hole in between. You know why? When you put into the oil, the perimeter is more. Every part of the vada is. You see, ladies will understand. Okay, unfortunately, cities are not of this shape. Cities are of the shape of a circle. And so in other words, when we now ask the question why cells are very small, we know the answer. You all agree with me? You are all with me? Any questions?
Sir,
yeah.
Why cancer cells keeps on?
This is a different thing altogether. And if you want to talk on that, we have Dr. Shishidhar here. He can perhaps give 1 hour talk because that's a different thing. Okay. The second question is, why are they uniform within each species? Remember, that was the second thing. If a particular species has evolved with a particular size, the variation around that is very small. Now, why is that variation very small? Okay, that is the question we would like to. For example, here is the data from a Chinese group on a cell called Chlorella vulgaris. The mean size is 4 micrometers, and the total variation is only within 1 to 1.5 standard deviations. Okay, they're all normally distributed around the mean. The variation is just around 1 to 1.5 standard deviation. So within a species, the variation is very little, but that variation could be now constant over other species where the cell size is larger. If the cell size is larger, around that increased size, the variation again will be smaller. Are you with me? So against or around a chosen size, variation is very small. Why is that? Now, why are they uniform in size? Let us say one cell of a particular size, chosen or evolved size is there, and it now starts growing. Of course, we already know perimeter to area or the surface area to volume goes on coming down. It becomes difficult for the resources to flow. That is one argument. However, for the cell to maintain the metabolic activity, even if resources are flowing, inside the cell, note that the cytoplasm is increasing, as a result of which the chemical composition goes on decreasing. Concentration of chemicals of proteins and all that goes on decreasing. Pardon? Dilution. When there is dilution, chemical activity and metabolic activity cannot be as much as it would be when the cell size is small, number one. Why not proteins produced in more abundance? The production of proteins is proportional to the amount of DNA available, because the transcription has to happen. Transcription can happen only on that single segment of DNA that is available in the cell. And so when the transcription is limited, translation is limited, proteins will be limited. So the total production of the proteins will be now limited, but the cell size or cytoplasm is increasing and the cell grows. As a result, what happens? The dilution effect leads to reduced metabolic and catalytic activities. As a result, cells will now turn to dividing so that the original size is now maintained. In other words, after cell divisions, they begin to grow. When they grow, cytoplasm volume increases. That leads to decreasing perimeter to volume ratio that we already saw. In addition to that, rate of production of proteins and catalysts and chemicals is limited by the amount of DNA available. So there is a limited transcription that can happen. That transcription rate remains constant, and as a result, rate of message flow from DNA to ribosomes or to protein production also now remains limited. As a result, the protein production is constant, but the cell volume has increased. Concentration of proteins and catalysts decreases. As a result, metabolic activities also get reduced. Senescence sets in. When there is no metabolic activity, cytoplasm cannot be maintained, senescence sets in. And to prevent the senescence, the only way is bring the cell size back to the original. How do you do that? Divide, cell division. So in fact, there is a paper here you can see if you want. People are now telling that you don't need anything else for division to be now triggered. Just the decreased concentration triggers all these activities. Cell goes on dividing. So in other words, we now know that cell division is also to maintain the cell size to solve all these problems. Okay? I mean, cell division is for other purpose also, but it is triggered by all these activities also. In other words, cell size is maintained to the uniform cell size in that particular species by this process. Any questions? Yeah.
When you look at the animal and the plant cells, the cell size of the animal cell can increase if the water into the cell increases.
Okay.
So, do you think that the cell division in animal cell versus the plant cell is controlled by the volume of the cell by pumping water inside?
I have no idea, but this particular paper says that one does not even need to look at any other regulatory mechanisms. Those regulatory mechanisms can be switched on purely by the relation between the proton size and the concentration of the catalyst and the metabolic activity. As an answer.
No, not an answer. Just I have one more comment. Is the cellular organization has to be somewhat unique to given species for relative, positioning of very different cells.
Exactly. Yeah.
Parts. Even if you look at it, there is molecular trouble, right? Although they may not have compartments like eukaryotes. Otherwise, this so-called stochastic chemical reactions cannot happen at
Yeah.
scale if they are not spatially organized. Like your photosynthesis 1 and 2, they have to be positioned exactly there
In that place.
in that place. Otherwise, you cannot have photosynthesis if they are subject apart from each other. So that spatial organization fixes the cell size and volume. It has to be inherited exactly the same. So that also keeps the view.
Yeah. In other words, all these things suggest that as the cell size goes on increasing, lot of internal alterations happen in this, in the structure, format, and positioning and all, leading to the triggering of the cell division, which brings back the cell size. Okay. So my science is over. I'll come to this implication of that little later. So simple lessons we can draw from what I so far argued is that cell size is limited by because of perimeter to area ratio. You all agree with that? Okay. And number two, cell maintains their size, otherwise they die due to lower metabolic activity and all the disturbances that we can visualize. So these are the two essential elements of the lessons that we can borrow from cell biology. Now, how can we extend this to abandonment of the cities? These lessons from cell biology. Consider a city. A city also is like a cell which requires oxygen from outside. What kind of oxygen? Your resources, your grains or water or whatever it is has to flow from outside that particular cell. For too long you can't exploit, you can't grow in your backyard and live. So you have to now depend on the resources grown outside your city. For a moment, go back to Harappan era, where there were no flights, no trains, no buses, no trucks. Only human beings were carrying the food and all that from one place to other place. What happens then? Survival of the city depends upon how much of the area surrounding it can supply resources to that particular city. You are all with me? Because you can't transfer a sack of ragi from Bangalore to Harappa. Because it takes years together at that time when there were no trains and all that. So within a short distance only you can transfer, and so the resource supply zone for any city is just a small band around the city as shown here. The supply zone is the perimeter area, not the perimeter area around the city. Okay? Now you already might have guessed. What happens as the city grows? As the city grows, city size is increasing, volume is increasing, but the perimeter size is relatively, perimeter increases, but relatively less or more? Less compared to the size of the city. As a result, the amount of food you can now prepare and supply to the city will be now reduced. And you can't get the transportation from far off distances, especially in the old times. For that matter, even in the present time, you can't get simply everything from far off distances. As a result, what happens? Demand on the supply of resources surrounding the city increases. As the demand increases, the fellow who produces the product puts more value to that. Rate of the raw material, resource material increases. So the fellow who produces resource material gets more profit. He now starts growing more and more of it. As you start growing more and more of it, ecological loss of the environment, resource loss in the soil erosion, soil depletion. So the whole of that area becomes depleted. As it depleted, its productivity further goes down. Further reduction in the resource value. As a result, the city will not be able to get more resources. As a result, the people in the city abandon and the city collapses. Just as a cell cannot grow beyond some size, purely because of the same physical principles that we can apply on, a city also cannot grow beyond some size, because if it grows beyond some size, it collapses.
When he built city, Bangalore,
Pardon me?
Kempaigoda, when he did this, he made four structures. One is in Mekli Circle,
I know.
one is in the Lal Bagh, another two I'm not very sure, sir.
Yeah.
But Bangalore city has grown 30-40 kilometers away from there.
Yes.
He didn't predict what you are saying. But why is that the city of Bangalore still...
Aren't you paying more for the resources today than going to pay over a period?
Yeah, maybe it will...
Yeah. Aren't people already trying to move like Ganeshaiah moving from Jakkur to... Okay? I have already moved out of Bangalore. I'm sure many are also willing to move out of... As a matter of fact, Vasundhara is sitting here and Nutan is sitting here. They also came to a place where they are staying today because they wanted to have a peaceful life. But that also is now occupied, correct? So this change is going on. Nevertheless, the principle is true. What is that? As city grows, demand for resources from the surrounding area goes on increasing. Though areas further get exploited, they become almost spoiled or environmentally disturbed areas. Further resource depletion, cities might get abandoned. Okay? In other words, to summarize, as city grow, the resource supply area to the city area, that is the perimeter to volume area, goes on decreasing. Also note, unlike in a cell, in a city, population density increases. Right? People from outside start getting into the same area, density increases, so the demand increases. So as city grows in size and density, per capita resource supply decreases, supply area is overexploited, cities collapse or abandoned because of it. Okay? Simple lesson from cell biology. But do you have evidence for this? Let me see if I can. Let me again go back to the Harappa Mohenjo-daro era. As I told in Harappa Mohenjo-daro, we didn't have trains or trucks or buses or anything. People were only transporting manually or maximum by carts. If you are a rich guy, by cart, otherwise you have to rely on people transporting from the head. As a result, you see Harappa Mohenjo-daro, hundreds of cities have disappeared. And I propose that something like this has happened. Of course, there are theories telling that there was climate change, the earthquakes, and so the rivers got changed. The rivers got changed might explain how Saraswati civilization might have moved away from Saraswati, but hundreds of cities away from Saraswati rivers also got abandoned and they started moving to other places, perhaps with the same reason. And if you actually carefully go back into the geography of Harappa and the city structure, you will believe what I am telling is very correct. Let me tell you what I mean. Now, before that, now what is this? This is a huge water tank by the side of Dolovira, Harappan city, and that is where the water was being stored for the entire city. And from there, water was being led through another small passage into wells like this all around. Now look at the wells, the steps of this well stops here, and there is a depression there. You know why? The water gets into this water is the natural water, that water is allowed to settle, all the dust settles here, but people are not allowed to get down below that, because if you get down, you will be dirtying the water and it will be dirty water also. And so you are supposed to harvest only from here. So the water for domestic purpose was being harvested from these wells, to which water was coming from the main tanks that were built all around the city. Let me give you the structure of an Harappan city written by a historian. Let us say this is the citadel. Citadel means the central place of majestic, or where is the YearEnd today? Commercial street, okay? Let us say that is the commercial street of Harappa Mohenjo-daro. Now surrounding that, there are markets. I have gone there and I have seen that literally this is the structure. These are the markets and market shops all around with a street on either side. Now by the side of it are these wells to supply water to this citadel and to the markets. And where are these huge tanks are situated? By the side of it, on either side. Huge tanks. And if this is a city, all around it is agriculture. So this agriculture supplies resources to this. This water source is supplying water to the city, and this was the structure. And this is all that a city can survive with. If at all it demands more, you can't get resources from outside and the city will collapse. Look at the structure of the city as written by the historians. Citadel, marketplace, water storage here, and water all around in the terms of the wells, and all around it now agriculture was there, but today the painter has put only trees there because it's all dried area. Why? It's all overexploited. The agriculture was overexploiting, the soil was eroded, and city got disappeared, city was abandoned, and you still see these abandoned areas all around it. So very clearly you can see symptoms of the argument that I so far told to suggest that Harappan cities perhaps have faced the same kind of fate that I was trying to explain. So each of these geographic units behaved as if it is a closed world. I get my resources only from within, let us say, 1.5 to 2 kilometers of my living, and resources can only be transported from a limited distance. So as the city and population starts growing, Resource demand increases because of the growth of the city. Surrounding area becomes exploited. Water, food, and other needs are reduced. Demand for the city cannot be met with them, and so the city collapses. I guess Hampi also has perhaps faced a similar problem. War might have happened, but I would say in the war these people lost also because they didn't have strong resources to supply the military, and so they lost the war perhaps. Now, if you actually, how many of you have gone to Hampi? Please raise your hands. Yes, all of you, fantastic. If you go to Hampi, you might have seen everywhere rocks and rocks and rocks. Have you seen? Why is it there is no greenery at all in Hampi? Please note that in Hampi, in the one among biggest, richest empires in the history of humankind, after Rome, historians say Vijayanagara was the richest empire, and that was also the cost of the survival. Why? In that city, there were 2 lakh soldiers. And there were anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 elephants. Imagine the amount of vegetation required for each elephant every day. Imagine 1,000 elephants every day eating so much amount of greenery. Every tree in the whole of that area must have been cut off. And the people living there have to get their, firewood also. There was no gas that time. There was no HP gas system. So gas also was to be made by the dried plant and trees. So all that was cut off. Hampi is purely full of stones because the vegetation is cut off, vegetation is gone, and it is not even allowed to recover as of yet. And that's why perhaps city was abandoned, not because of the war. Where is the evidence for that? I'll show you the evidence. Today, as the city started picking up the tourism, there is now fresh growth. And remember, water was not a problem at all for the Hampi city. Tungabhadra is a fantastic, 364 days live river it is. But the reason why it disappeared is because of the overexploitation. And today, they're all coming back because people are now realizing that there is fresh hopes in the cultivation and all. Let me give you other physical evidence to now show that my argument perhaps is true. This is a Beijing city. This is the satellite image taken from 1990 to 2016. Now compare this with the diagram I wrote, city in the center and supply zone. All this yellow color here is the agricultural crop system that was supplying resources to this city. You can see that. But by 2008, you see what has happened? All that is gone. So the surrounding area that was supplying resources is dried up. Exactly now fitting to the argument that I was talking about. And so Beijing city, when actually this Olympiad was held, they draw a new plan for the Beijing city to create forest all around, and they are now trying to, like green belts we had in Bangalore, they are now trying to do all that around Beijing.
So in the previous example,
Yeah,
here city is growing.
Yeah.
Therefore, supply zone is coming down, or supply is.
No, what was in 1992 under supply zone is now destroyed. Whether city grows or, what happens when the agricultural land they cannot really give any good yields, they will now abandon, and so city people will come and buy it. I will not be able to survive because my agriculture is not paying me. I would rather sell it off and then now make living out of it.
Another argument.
Yeah.
What made people to pick that area as a city?
Yeah, which one? This one, huh?
Wherever.
Okay. Well, this comes to what is called a self-organization.
Yeah.
Shall I tell that answer to the end?
Okay.
I don't want to cut off. In fact, most cities are a consequence of random deviation and self-organization. I think I can talk about it. So now let us come to the last example. I will end my story with this, but this story is a bit long. You have to bear with me. This story, I think Belwadi was with me. Bangar.
Oh,
Yeah. I had been there to this place, and I found this place a fantastic example for an historian to now study. So I went on digging around this city. Now this is the picture you get when you go to this place called Bangar. Not now, after the talk, you go and put Google Bangar. This is one among the top 10 haunted cities in the world. Haunted towns. Okay, it's abandoned, haunted. People say there is ghost there. We heard a lot of stories. If you go there, in fact, there is an archaeological board. People are not allowed after 6 o'clock. Why? After 6 o'clock, devils come there and they will hunt. And people have experimented. Have actually tested this by daring to go inside. And they have heard a number of voices. And what those voices and all that, you please Google on your own and then find out. Okay. So this is the city. This actually is a palace of the princess who was cursed by a magician. We will not go into those details. Now this is another view of the city. See how everything is intact here. Okay? The fort, entry fort, houses of course are now abandoned because they have all fallen. Fort. And you see, this is the marketplace where diamonds were being sold. Beautiful stretch of roads. This is not rebuilt. This is all 1700 or 1800, 1600 roads and buildings built strongly during that time. Now, I also want you to note that this Bangar is here. This is Gujarat. Bangar is here. Jaipur is just about 60 kilometers from there. And there is a reason why I am telling about Jaipur. Okay. Now, from here onwards, you have to be a little more careful in analyzing this. This city that I am talking about, from a satellite, is located here. This white patch. The whole, all that white patch is those buildings. Okay. Can you see a line here? That is a fort of the city. You can see how big this fort is. So the fort was protecting it, and that fort is what I showed. This fort, all around that fort, and so that fort was protecting it. Now I have given a blown up area of, view of the same city. You can see another fort entry and administrative building, and somewhere here is the palace of the queen, temple. No one worships anything there, but the temple is still intact. Occasionally some well-minded people like Belwadi, they go and put lot of banana there and lot of monkeys around there, they come and collect it. We in fact saw that scene. Parts of the palace completely dilapidated. Look at how strong the pillars are. All that is abandoned, overnight abandoned. And this is the princess palace which is abandoned. The story goes in a very different way, and apparently this princess, as usual, most princesses are very beautiful. She was very beautiful, and so there was a guy who wanted to marry her, and so he sent a magical oil to her to apply to her hair because she was fond of these perfumes and all. But the moment she was applying, she came to know that this guy has cheated her, and so if she doesn't apply, she goes and curses that magician, and now that magician puts a curse on her that lest your palace and city and the whole thing be destroyed, and so the city was destroyed. This is the story that people say around. Actually, what has happened is very interesting. Now, this is another view of the market. See how beautiful it is still. Let us go into the history of this. The city was established sometime during 1523 by this famous king called Bhagavan Das, who was ruling Jaipur palace. He had a number of sons. The first two among them is Pratap Singh and Madhav Singh. Pratap Singh was given the Jaipur fort. So Madhav Singh apparently now started fighting. Why is that I am also not given the rights in the city? And so this Bhagavan Das decided that he will build another city for Madhav Singh. So he built this city in Bangar in 1523, a new city altogether. Now this grew as a mega city. Madhav Singh was a very intelligent man. He started now putting competition to Jaipur. So he attracted a lot of these merchants from Jaipur. How did he do? He provided free residence and free marketplace and transportation to Jaipur. That time transportation is by chariots and horses and all. So free transportation like the Karnataka government for ladies. So no charge at all. So much and protection for them to now travel around. So a lot of these facilities were given. People started pouring in. Free everything. I only have to get the business done and pay a proportion of my business as taxes to the king. So lot of people began to arrive there, and that's why lot of these marketplaces were built. And then suddenly in 1783 it disappeared. Now as I told, I have gone into this details of the city's fate. Let me go step by step and see what actually has happened. So the entire city has only two water sources. One among them is this. Both of them are by springs. Rainfall is just around 100 millimeters there. You can't rely on rainfall. This is a spring source well, and from here the water was being drawn to the entire city. Where is this well located? Now if you see carefully, this is a city and the water source, can you see a dark patch here? That is the water source, and the marketplace was here. That is the marketplace. So what happened was water was drawn from here and was supplied there. There was another tank created for the water to be drawn to the market people and their residences. So this was the setup. The businessmen were very happy. They went on accumulating. More and more markets were built and more water was used. Gradually, water became a demanding thing. Water could not be now met. Was not became insufficient for all the merchants to use, and so they had to find a new source of water. So more and more added as the water was available. More and more people came there, and more demand for water, and so they have to find new source of water. I have reduced the whole thing here. This is a city. This is where that water was going. As you can see, that is where the water was going. Please note, there is a river here and there is a dam there. There is a dam there. Now water was trapped from this place as Bengaluru is trapping from Kaveri river now. Okay. So water was trapped from there and it was brought and it was given to the market people here. So water was supplied. Again, market people were happy. More businessmen came and king started getting more and more tax. He invited more and more people. More people accumulated. Water was there, but now the food demand increases. The food resource also was demanded. The people all around felt that there is more marketing for the food than water. Water is being given by the king. So let us now grow food and give to this. Sell at a high rate to the city people. As I told you, and you remember the red zone. Okay. Now this river go back, and that is a dam. Go back and you see the agriculture began to flourish around the city, around the river. As agriculture began to flourish, they used the water from the river. Water level in the dam went down, so water supply to the city went down. People are producing the food, people are getting the food, but there is more demand for the water. And gradually, as the water decreased, and also as the food was demanding the water, total available water to the city went on reducing. But the king is still promoting it. More people, density is increasing, and all of that is getting destroyed. As a result, what happened? Greed of taxes resulted in an overgrowth. Demand for food increased. As the demand for food increased, water was diverted, upstream for food production, and so water level went down. Water became a scarcity. Exactly during that time in 1723, 83, what happened was, there was a huge famine in the whole of that area. It is called Chalisa famine. Why it is called Chalisa famine? In the calendar of Indian calendar system, that 1783 is called as 1840 Vikram Samvatsar. 40 is Chalisa. So 40 famine. So that famine came about. It's a famous, you can also Google it. The whole area suffered with lot of this famine, water problem. In fact, about 11 million people died in that area, and 3% of villages around Delhi disappeared because of this problem. This place, which was already suffering from water problem, faced more problem. No merchant could now live there. They all abandoned the whole city and left the city to be now dilapidated. This fort was abandoned. In other words, Bangar became today a haunted town, not because of any devil or otherwise, because of the devil of the overgreed of the king to now invite the merchants and to feed them water and resources, which led to this. Okay? Come back to my model. You will now believe that may not be exactly in the structural form that I told, but functionally, in terms of the demand and resource and exploitation, cities get abandoned because of this. What is the solution? It is not that I am now proposing a cell biology theory to city. It appears people have already thought about it. And so, they are arriving at a new design for cities. And here is a new design source. Here is a source for that. Now, what is this design? The city here is the spiralar growth. And in between, forests and agriculture, you see 4D is agriculture, 4C is forest, etc. So, grow your city with the forest and all around. What happens to the perimeter to area ratio? Is maintained, because perimeter is all around the growth of the city. And if you carefully see, note that this design seems to be almost similar to the neural cells system that we saw, which has managed this problem of perimeter to area ratio a long time back in the course of evolution. So it appears, if at all we want to have a sustained, long-lasting cities, circular growth of cities is not a solution. But yeah.
Like Bombay.
Bombay is perhaps now learning it, but in general we need to now grow out as an extended, arms of the city, and that perhaps is the way we can survive. Thank you very much.